And thank you for coming, and thanks to the two speakers earlier. So today I'm going to do something different. First, I'm going to sit down because I'm going to do some live coding. So if you feel sleepy, just stand up. I don't mind that. And second, I brought another chair, so if you want to come here, sit with me, that's not a problem as well. So remember, the chair's here. It's available. All right, so I am Harley, a co-founder at CoderSchool. We don't know what we are yet, but it's a company that trains experienced programmers to learn something fast. So let's say if you're a web developer and you want to try something new, let's say iOS programming or Android programming, we have courses for you. And so far, since last summer, we've graduated, finished 6 classes, and 100 graduates, 99 alumni. So for every class, it's an 8-week program, and we let people apply. Over time, 2,000 people apply. And this infographic is old, but by now this was made before the last batch. So some of you have been to our demo day. So imagine 8 weeks, you spend only 4 hours seeing me or Charles or other trainer in their just twice a week, 2 hours, 2 hours. And then you spend about 16 hours, 20 hours a week sort of doing homework that we write in our curriculum. And over time, you learn in 8 weeks, it feels like 8 months. And you can do iOS or Android, and our third class is Ruby on Rails. So that's a little bit about us. We partner with some companies, so because we've been doing that, we also do corporate training. We teach at companies. So if your company feel like learning one of those 3, then we can do it, intro or advanced. Can't do Scala yet, but we have agenda for Node.js and other things. So, first exercise, fill in the blank. P underscore A underscore, the underscore is the letter. Does anyone know what the word is? Anyone make a guess? Playground, awesome. So that's playground, and that's the picture. The gist of my talk is that playground, think of the playground. It's not just, we're not exercising on the playground. We're actually exploring code. So we're looking at playground as an easy way to explore a language. It's a way to prototype, to learn things very quickly, learn new. And then sometimes you create some content you can share with others after you learn. So why is it called playground? So that's a playground. But on your MacBook, if you have a MacBook, and that's the iOS Xcode playground. It looks like that on the left. I'll show you more, but this is the prettier version of the playground, where you change anything on the left on the code and everything updates quickly on the right, and it looks amazing. You just make the balloon bigger, the cannon fatter, and the gravity change, and all this reflects in that. So it's amazing. So Apple introduced Swift and as a new language for iOS development, and they also introduced this. But they were not the people who came up with the idea. Well, a lot of people, over time, they thought, hey, when designers write code, in the first talk, Guillaume said that, oh, our designer writes some Scala code. But how long do you have to wait from the moment you change some, a styling or some information on the design, the coding screen until you can actually see what it looks like? So here's one of the most inspiring talks many years ago. So then Playground was built sort of based on that inspiration. Brett Victor worked at Apple before, but he said this: creators need immediate connection to what they create. So to me, I like it a lot because I like changing things and things just work. We're living in 21st century, not like the punch card area 20 years ago. So that's from the talk, Inventing on Principle. It's pretty nice if you just Google that, search on YouTube. So think about the way we write in code today or tomorrow. It's still the same. So we think a lot, maybe use paper or pen. Sometimes you forget to think. And then you write code. And then you're like, okay, maybe I need this library. I need that library. And then you run it. Oh, actually it doesn't work because it depends on another library. Oh, if you use NPM or your bundler, some libraries just stop working and you're like, okay, maybe I need to find another tool that uses another library. So there's some dependency hell and stuff. But let's say your project is simple. Okay, let's say you build some web application. You add Bootstrap to your project and you write some code. And then, so in some cases you compile. It's the same, you run the server. That's the same idea. You open the browser to test and see the result, and then go back. And then you complain, why is this application so slow? Like, maybe Rails is too slow, Ruby is slow. So then, I thought I have a nicer, like the XK City one, but maybe it's later. So what's good about this? It slows you down so you can write quality programs. When you're actually waiting, you're twiddling your thumb, and you actually think about, actually I can make this faster. Oh, I actually don't need this, right? By making it slow, it's good. So tough decision ahead, you know that your software you write cannot just be arbitrary, bad. So this helps you write better code if you're a patient person, if you're a really smart person, right? But nowadays, we want everyone to be able to write code faster so that we test out the idea and we can throw it away if we don't like to, right? To use it anymore. So similar to Playground, who here have heard of Lighttable? Anyone? So Lighttable is an IDE, or it's text editor, but because it looks like that Playground thing, you can definitely recommend checking it out. It's good for Clojure, another programming language, and it's marvelous. You change things here. Your code, you can mouse over an integer, and you can slide the mouse, and the number just change. So it's nice. But then they write plugin for other languages. It's okay, not that great anymore. And then you have Xcode Playground. Let's take a look very soon. And you also, who here writes web applications? Can you raise your hands? Web applications? Right? Do you use live reload? Every time you change your CSS, JavaScript, you want the browser to load it. It's on the other screen. You don't want to mouse, drag your mouse over or Alt tab and then Control R or F5, right? But if you use a Chrome Inspector, who here uses Chrome Inspector? One of the most amazing things, right? I mean, now all the browsers have it. You go there, it's for CSS only, right? Let's say on my Mac is Command Alt J. It's easy for me to see because these are the buttons that I can't see the numbers because I press too many times, right? You press that and then you see, I can change this element, the color. You click on their color and they give you a palette and you can change. It even lets you save back to your file. So that's awesome. Before that, building web application was bad. But JavaScript, not so much. They allow you to set a breakpoint, right?
You can edit JavaScript as well.
Exactly. You can edit JavaScript and then you run it again.
No, you just save the file.
Right.
You save it.
Yeah, thank you. So it's definitely, it's good in the sense that you save it and it will get run, right? It's not as cool as, let's say, if you actually have the playground or the Lighttable thing. Let's say if you have Flappy Bird, like the pipe are moving this way, right? An HTML5 JavaScript app. And you just change the number down there in the JavaScript file, doing nothing else. It will just change. And the gravity of the bird, you just change it from 1 to 10, the bird will go, and then, game over. So, go back to this playground. Of course, Apple is great at marketing, but it's really, their playground is similar to what we need to have in other places. It's an interactive environment, coding environment, that evaluates statements one by one, even though it's a compiled language, like Java, C, and Swift, and then display results. And then you can actually watch it at its changes. You can actually see. So these are the things, again, you can play with it. I just mentioned, let's drink the Kool-Aid and try the playground. So I'm gonna use the second chair. Can I ask my sister to come here and help me hold the mic? Hi, Joe. Thanks for volunteering. Okay, so let's see. I have a new playground. So my playground, right? The say rocking playground, and put it anywhere here, really. So we can see that I've done nothing, right? But I'm learning Swift, even if I don't know Swift, because of the speed it's giving me back information. I'm learning Swift much more quickly. So let's say, oh, I wonder if I have to declare the type is Swift like, strongly typed. So let's say maybe I need an array, maybe a list of numbers. So is it var list number? And then like, is it correct? Oh, it's great. I can learn like, is it maybe list 2 is, an array. And then I just do that. Is it semicolon like that? So you get all this feedback. But let's say I'm going to write a function, okay? So let's say sum of the element in a list. Now, obviously, if I just write that, let's see, it will try to compile, and immediately I get some information. Well, you need to tell it what it is. So let's say, oh, it's a list of integer. And then how do you do it? Maybe I have result as 0 for item in list. Result is added with that, and let's say sum will return. What do you think will happen? Well, there's no return value, right? So let's say the playground is like keeping track of what you're doing. You don't change the screen, you're just staring at your code. So I click here, non-void. So if you don't do anything, it's void. Okay, so I return a number. Yeah? So I return a number, looks like everything runs fine. Great, so let's test this. Sum 1, 2, 3, 4. What's the result? What's the result? You should be faster than the playground. Boom, it's everything on the right. And it's like, oh wait, how does it know if it's 10? So I'm going to just say, oh, I have my result here. 4 times it run that. Whoa, let's see. I'm just gonna add this. Yeah, add this. Basically, this is watching, and maybe I'm just tracking it. It displayed right down here. So let's see. We sum something much bigger. Yeah. A much bigger function, so I don't know how to do that. Let's get a range, 1 to 1,000, and let's say, so you just initialize a range and then use an array constructor, and then you take the sum of it. Hey, that's cool. Whoa. So it just show you the value over time, changes over time, and if you want to have a lot of fun, then you can maybe see this, and then you probably crash the browser. Because it's trying to do a lot here. Yeah, so we have the time. So then you're like, okay, what am I writing? I'm writing stupid code, and maybe this sum should just be, you know what it should be? This number should just be 100. This is 1 million. 1 million. Then we use math, right? And multiply by 1 million plus 1 divided by 2, right? So, well. That's what happens when you write slow code. Okay, so that's Swift. So that's inspiration. And hopefully again it happened, and then so that's, and then I show you a little bit more. Using this, you can learn Swift in a better way. Let me open another playground I already did. So open this Swift file. Whoops. Actually, this is. Okay, it looked like this. So if you learn Swift, you can also learn the functional side of it. And then you can actually apply a filter, and then you can reduce it. Reduce just means an array, you fold it, right? There's 2 elements next to each other, you fold it, and then you add them together, you have the sum. I mentioned Swift first as an inspiration. Let's get to Ruby. Can I ask a show of hands, who here knows Ruby? Oh, yay, 3 hands. What do you guys know? What about Java? Java, guys? PHP? More hands, please? No? PHP, Python? Okay, maybe I can do 1 language each. Maybe not Java. So we'll see. Let's say we learned Ruby today. If you learn Ruby today, you're like, what? How do you learn it? I'm explaining a little bit here, right? Ruby makes life a little easier because they say, oh, you don't have to compile your file. Just run it, and it runs 1 line at a time, and it still works. Even though if your file breaks at the middle, the first part will still run, and it makes you feel happy. You're halfway there. So in this slide, right? Ruby, if you learn Ruby, this is already faster than other things. Like let's say if you write Java and then you know how to use Java C and then what compiler flags to use. So Ruby, it's like, hey, do you know there's a Ruby REPL? So REPL, just like an interactive console. You type some code, and then that Ruby thing come back. So that's IRB, interactive Ruby. And then you can, I can actually run the Ruby file without compiling. I just run Ruby file name. And then some people say, okay, I want color completion. I want things just complete and I want colors. I want easier to inspect the files, the models, the objects, right? Pretty print or whatever name you call it. Then you install more tools. And then some of you write Rails application. Who here have heard of Ruby on Rails? It's a web application. Now it's the most popular. They take over PHP as the most horrible, the best programming web framework in the world. And when you're the best, everyone will start hating you. But then there are Rails programmers who write Ruby code without really knowing much Ruby because it's so easy to write. So it's cool. Then we have to learn things the hard way. So I'll show you that today. And one of the good ones is use guard. But then it's hard to set up. Guard, what is it? It's a thing that watches your directory, your files. If anything changes, it runs certain commands. Do you want to run tests? Do you want to reboot the server? Do you want to reload the browser? Do you want to send an email notification to someone? You see, then your head starts to explode because there are too many options. Let's learn things, maybe by doing it the most stupid way possible. It's actually more enjoyable. So I'll go to Ruby here. I'll just start one file. That's I say hello file. And like a lot of new languages, Ruby is not new. If you went to the last Rocking talk, Ruby was invented a year before Java, 1994, but it didn't come to the US until 2000, right? So let's say in Ruby, you can actually say, hey, hello, and that's it, right? There's no, public void main, etc. And then so here, how do you run it? So I mentioned IRB first, interactive Ruby, and you can actually say, hey, hello world, right? Hello, and that spit you back the output, and then here's the return. So this function is void, but in Ruby it's not void, it's nil. Now then I do, what's the file name? Hello. So that's one more way to do it, right? Hello Ruby, and it just say, hey, I'm hello. But I want to build that sum function. That's a good way to practice my programming skill. So I'm showing you one way you can just do it, and you can do it for any language. One way is to do here is, let's say I look up how to write a function, but I have a list, and then maybe I do the same thing. Now Ruby is dynamically typed, so but it's still strong. It means once it thinks a variable is something, it doesn't change its mind. So let's say you have, let's make it bigger. So you have slightly similar, but everyone can read this. Like result plus item. All right, help me catch the bug if that happens. And then what happens? Let's say 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals. So in Ruby, you can insert variable in that way. But I'll just make it slightly easier to see over here. So sum 1, 2, 3. And then I can go here and I say, oh, Ruby, hello, right? So typically people do this, and then you just back and forth, back and forth. You have two monitors, it's the same thing. Of course, you can go to IRB and then you say require this file. We all do this, but I start to realize that it's still too slow to learn. Require, let's say, relative, and let's say this file is hello, and then you can do that, so it loads the file. So now it's the next concept I want to introduce to you is file watcher. So we've watched the file changes and we run it. Why can't this system say, you tell it to do, hey, if I change my file, just run Ruby hello world for me. Yeah. So out of many tools, interestingly, I mean, Ruby, they have a lot of libraries. If anything about libraries in Ruby, you have there's too many, right? But so here's the library in Node.js. Who here knows the Node.js ecosystem? No? Okay, well, if you just type npm install, global, save, I have it in notes, but basically that's just, it's like a binary file. It's a program you download to your computer. So now you have this thing called Notemon. So it just monitors file changes. So I'm telling it, hey, Notemon, why don't you just execute Ruby on the file that I'm going to edit, okay? And then Notemon's like, okay, fine, I'm watching you, right? So every time you change anything now, so you see, I can start, I've saved the file right now, and you see I have some result on the right, and now I'm happily, this is my playground. I'm happily, okay, you know, as a good programmer, I should maybe consider all the edge cases like that, right? And maybe like, you know, integer overflow. I don't know what the max number here, but if you add two very big numbers together, I'm sure that will happen, right? But let's say we don't have time to type that big number. You can type that big number by, let's say, 10 to the power of 12. And then let's say Ruby can do like, you know, 10 to the power of 5, and range is from 1 to that. I need to convert it to an array. So let's say I'm like, whoa, this is not true anymore. So let's say I have to type this, right, until 10,000, yeah? And then you see that this is, oh, that's good. Then you do the little math on paper. Oh man, this program is smarter than me. It's run very fast. And you can start thinking, okay, well, what if I want it to be smarter? I want it to be like, you know, maybe I want to run, it becomes exhausting really. I have to do that puts, you know, so I can read on my screen. Imagine you write on the left-hand side and your mother looks at the right-hand side. Right? Your mother will read the right-hand side like, oh my God, my son is so smart. And you tell your mom that, hey, my mom, this is the computer that is smart, not me, right? So how can we be smart together? What if I write something like that? Obviously, if I run now, hey, 3 arguments. What kind of program are you? You have 1 argument and you give me 3 arguments. And then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to change something to make it work. So let's say, oh, this is a way to take multiple arguments. And then, you know, now I have multiple arguments, I will run it. And then you see that it will, let's say I don't have these guys. And then it will say 6. I'm like, oh, I'm a genius. Now it works. But what happens? You broke your other code, right? You wrote something earlier that also should work with this. And then you have to write like, okay, maybe if this list has 1 added argument, then, you know, calculate all the elements in that list. If this list has multiple arguments, then let's calculate them all. And then over time, your code will look like this to save you time. So I walk you through, that's the first version, right? And then you like, second version is, oh, I learned some functional programming here. Like, I have an array and I reduce it with a 0. You know, having code like this is so important because your playground is so useful. You know, if you write like that and you think, you know, it's so wonderful. I'm going to run it on this file, E2. Note again, that Notemon exact E2. So watch the changes on the left, okay? Like, okay, so it runs it very well because this plus assume that it's 0, right? And it's 0 plus the element. And then what if you do an empty string, no empty array, and then it doesn't have anything to it? So this is so important because, and when I wrote that, I'm like, oh, I have a bug. So I have to give it a default 0. So that's an example of how having, you know, some sort of test, but this is not test, this is drawing. Well, I don't draw balloons and stuff here because we're writing really simple code, you know, but if you want, you can draw maybe 10 candies, it's the same thing. So then E3, then I start to become a better programmer in Ruby. I'm like, okay, I'm going to create a class, right? In Ruby, everything is object-oriented. And then, you know, the beautiful thing is, there's no more print statement. Ruby lets you just say, hey, I'm setting up the test, and then I just inherit from this class, and then you can write any method you want, as simple as that. Test sum empty. It means I'm trying to test this function with an empty array, and then it should be 0. So everyone can read that, right? This looks like English, and even, you know, the mother will get frustrated because there's nothing on the right-hand side. How she looks on the left, on your left, and she's like, I understand that. So your tests start to look like documentation as well. So not just live reloading your code by watching the file changes, you now also documenting your code. Hey, I expect my code to behave this way. Check it out, right? Empty array, sum is 0. Non-empty is like that. Or what if I give it a range? Then it's like this, 6. And then what if it's, you know, what if, I don't know what I do here. Oh, multiple arguments, right? And then you see that, okay, my sum function now looks a little bit more complicated, right? And it's like, okay, length is like that. And if you want to make it even more complicated, like your mom will ask, hey son, you're so smart. Why don't you write me a function that calculate only the even numbers, only take the sum of even numbers? I was like, Mom, I'm going to copy and paste this whole thing and I will just do this, right? I copy and paste, and then I say, sorry. Say, see, copy and paste just make me unhappy, so I don't want to do it. So then you're like, oh, sum of even. How do you do sum of even? I can't type. And then you're like, okay, this list, now you have to somehow, for I is from 0 to blah blah. So of course you can do list is select only the element that are even. So this is the remainder from when you divide by 0, that's even. Then suddenly you only sum the even. And your mom gets so excited. Can you give me a function that sum all the elements that are divisible by 3? You're like, well, that's like twice more code, mom, and I have to write tests for that too. I was like, well, then you're, okay, that's not fun. So how to make it more fun is that you have to learn the language a little bit more. Why is this select, divisible by 3 and by 2 in here? It should be outside, or it should be somewhere. So then to save you time, save us time also, then I would do something like this. Look, it's still very short and sweet. What happens? I have something that treats the arguments as wrap, and I just say, even if you give me the range, it could be, this list could be, you can give me this standard, one list, right? Or you give me a range, that's one argument only. The first one still one argument, second still one argument, and then you give me, let's say, what else? Multiple arguments and a lot of them. So then even like this A, and then this A is like 4 somewhere, 54. So things get complicated, but I still have my sum as beautifully simple. And I know that it works because I just run that Notemon thing, and then this is E4, and then you run it, and like all tests passed. Remember, I stopped using print statement. Everything on the right is just a dot. If it passes, I see a dot, right? So you see down here, I add more tests, test my wrapping method. It means whether you give me a one argument, that's one list, or a range, that's one argument, these 4 arguments, I just convert everything into list. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I calculate the sum. So I start to write better code just by playing with the playground. I don't need to Google anything, fancy, oh, what's the best way to sum elements in Ruby? I don't care. I have fun, right? It's my playground. So let's say that's it for Ruby, and it's not fun if I only talk about Ruby. So let's talk about PHP next. No, I'm joking. So this is the summary, and what I just did. Use the simplest tool possible. I use Notemon. In Ruby, I mentioned guard, and you have to have configuration files. You have all these things. Oh, when the Ruby file changed, do this and that. That's too much. Just use Notemon and then one line, right? And if found my file changed, run Ruby that file. If I code in Swift, run Swift that file. If I code in Python, run Python hello.python, py. So file watching is good, right? As soon as you save the file, you reload the page, and now you make sure you start printing statements. Remember the playground, right? Print it out. So you save, and then it's just visually feeding back to you, right? Your compiler is as smart as you are, so you have to make sure your compiler is following you. You don't want to write code for an hour and then things just don't compile. You just want it to always compile. You start by an empty function, compile, return nothing, write something. So then visually verify results. Of course, I'm a poor man. I just write some text line. If I'm I work at Apple, then I'll just make balloons and number of candies. You can make better visualization. So that next, I also mentioned that as you become more confident with that language, you have to learn the language well, right? If you learn Scala, Ruby, they make you a better programmer. When you just feel like, oh, this is fun, my playground, I keep playing with the same tool. How to go through an array? Let's not use a for loop. You know what the problem with the for I is equals 0 and then less than n is? Sometimes you're like, does it start with 0? Does it start with 1? And then sometimes you're like, does it start n with less than or less than equal? And then when you have the next one for j, and then you're like, okay, maybe the previous one was like -1, and things go crazy. And then you start changing the I and j variable in there. And then your friends go crazy, right? So refactoring the code here is like, try not, we use a new language, we have to love it, and if it tells you don't use a for I loop, unless you really need to, then don't, right? So refactoring with confidence, as you can see in my sum method, I stopped using I, and such, right? So visualize here, just to summarize, you can see the test result in real time. The poor man solution is put something, right? But the rich man solution is you can write the test case like this, right? And to get better. And if you do this, it takes no time. In an interview, I can show you. If you go to interview for maybe a PHP job, Java job, Python, you write code and you know what code you need to test. If he writes you, let's say, oh, write a function that find all the prime number in an array of numbers. Oh, no problem. So this is the input, the output, and you just save the file and it just works. So language features, it's just not about array and numbers, integers. We haven't even used string, and in each language there are more powerful string manipulation. The problem with string is that it actually takes more space, right? Sometimes, oh, is it like a really long string or a short string? And if you have an array of string, then sometimes the compiler becomes really stupid, right? It just, then you need to know the language a little bit more. Why does it have this? Because it's like Unicode, right? Backward compatibility, a code from left to right, right to left, and how you just check, compiler, damn it, just check for me, does this character appear in this string? And but it's not that simple, Like some language give you a contains method, some give you all these other checks, some convert a string into an array for you. But so how to avoid that problem? Well, start with the playground and just play with it. And you can see wrong or right. You no longer have to tear your hair. Oh, I pressed the up button too much. I run the wrong file. I edit another file. And then you're like, okay, I need to remember this file here. I copied a.rb to b.rb, and then later you keep trying the wrong file. I've been there. I think this is the playground idea is a way to do it better. So, for example, with Ruby, I use block to take care of, I don't know if you can, that's a little fast, I'm sorry, but block here is the second thing here actually, is that it allows you to test for things like this. When you can write function, you take a sum, but then you provide a condition to it. This is only possible if you know the language, right? If you code Ruby like a Java programmer, or if you code Java like a Ruby programmer, like normally it doesn't work very well. You have to know the strength. And strength of Ruby is passing the block around. Strength of Python is passing the function around. Function is, it's just like a variable, but it's not the case in Ruby, right? And then you can learn a little bit more. Okay, when do I use object-oriented? When do I not? And you have things like this. So you see, I can calculate all the elements that are even, like that, and all the elements. Who here can guess what this function does? Call the sum of all the numbers between 1 and 10 that are factors of 10. So 10 have to be divisible, right, by that number. So we have 10, 5, 2, 1. All right, so, and then Python. So I mentioned, do you know list comprehension? So you can do the same thing in Python. And when I was, new to Python, I was like, well, I don't know where to start, but here's where I start. I can start writing really stupid function, sum. And then at first, the sum function is really simple. So I write sum 1, 2, 3, and it's like sum empty. These are two important cases. And then you're like, whoa, I need to sum a lot of numbers. So let's say, sum from 1 to 100. And then my mom told me she wants even numbers. So what if I can just pass in the function name even? Well, then I just define what even is. And then I just pass in as a second argument in that function. I don't even need to go and memorize everything, but I just type and then I save, and then there's an error on the right hand side, but then now it works. So this function, you don't pass anything, there's no function. But if you pass something, you filter the list with that. And what is it? Then you start learning too that Python gives you this thing. You don't use the select or reduce. Python actually say, no, don't use those, right? It's better to use list comprehension. So it looks like math, right? Curly brace, x for x in something. And then you learn a lot more. Okay, what's a good way to do it in Python? So you see, I learned to do anonymous function here. I just pass in, hey, sum all the elements that are equal to, what's that? Divisible by 3. Okay, so that's Python. And because not many of you use Swift, so maybe I will refrain from showing off too many Swift things. But I also have the Swift file in the terminal. You can run it in the command line. All right, so let's do it in JavaScript. Well, I know I'm going to run out of time by this time, so this is all I show you for JavaScript. Who here have written tests for JavaScript? Yeah, some of you, right? What do you use? Mocha, Kai, comma, right? And it's like for someone new coming in, setting up, oh, I have to include this file, include that. It becomes difficult. And again, what's my playground? Simple, one file, and that's it. So this is one way. There's a module, just the simplest way, and then you just, it's the same idea. But if you go to join a team, you have to learn the Mocha, the Kai, the comma, and other tests, unit and stuff. But you get much better by then because you just write JavaScript and you get better at being a JavaScript programmer. Let's say you use Swift and curiosity, right? Like every time I only use Xcode to write Swift, and over time you realize that my language skill is not that good. I keep writing Swift like it's Java. And so I teach, iOS development and a course, right? Like by the end of the 8th week, part-time, obviously, 2 evening classes a week, you can write, the people who graduate from the course can write beautiful applications. You can write something similar to the App Store. But then, some of them look like Android apps. And then some, when we review the code, it's like he's still putting the semicolon in there. And then, he still write like Java. So how to avoid that? We should make time to have fun. So Swift, for example, is one way. You can write Apple desktop app, or you can just write script that take like command line argument. So I write something, I show here is just, it's a package manager, just install the basic thing, and you just run Notemon, load everything in the ROM folder, and then run my Swift file. The Swift file I'll show you earlier, it's just very basic Swift file, func, sum, etc. So what do we learn today? Worse is better. That's number one. So basically, start out by making more mistakes, we learn more. So if you just write in one file, you don't try to be a perfectionist, and you run it every time you make some changes. But if you have to switch, compile, like that's annoying. If you use JetBrains, do you have the money for it? If you use Visual Studio and all that, that helps you. But when you don't, what happens? So here's worse is better. Just use one single file and then learn from it, pick up a language, learn it well. Now, then next is consistency is key. So consistency means doing the same thing over time. So it means you have to remember what are the good things. Then you just, that's how I do array. That's how I do string. Then that's how I use immutable data. You hear this more and more in this new age, immutable data. It's super important. Do not write, for loop with I and J. You can change elements. Like, no, because then what happens if you run it on 2 processes, 2 threads, and things just like go kaboom, right? So you just want it to be reliable, right? If it's immutable, you pass in a list. You don't change that list. Functional programming is great because of that, right? But people thought it was too hard, so they invented object-oriented programming, so they can put global variable in there. So, consistency is key. We learn the good things, become better programmer over time. And then when you become more comfortable about yourself and about making mistakes when you write stupid stuff, and then see it on the right-hand side. And then the next thing is, to keep learning, learn more faster. So learn more faster here is that if I'm a web developer, I shouldn't be afraid to just try out, I go to iOS, Objective-C or Swift, doesn't matter. If I pick one, how do I do it? I go to Java, Android, it's Java. Oh, someone has, JetBrains has Kotlin. Okay, I'll try it. So more here is more languages, but it doesn't slow you down, because it increases the curiosity. So with this principle, we can have something like, agile coding, which is the topic of my talk. And then, in the world right now, people have made it really easy for people who love programming to try out new things. So here are the links. So let's say if I interview people, I just go to coderpad.io, and then you pick a language, let's say Ruby, and you just fire it. And what happens? You just tell someone to write some code and press Command-Enter, and it runs on the right-hand side. So the person get the feedback immediately, so then I can run the sum function again very easily, and then I can just show it. So what did we learn? We just learned that you reduce it with a plus method, and then you can now say put 1, 2, 3. and then command enter, and you see the result right away. So that's your playground. The next one, if you do web development, it's extremely exciting when there are links like this, CodePen, Plunker.co, and CodePen. They allow you to create multiple files, your CSS file, JavaScript file, you install, bootstrap, and anything. What's that? Yeah, so I probably typed it wrong. So CodePen.io, and this is the online playground. It means you can go to a library computer and hike away, and you learn new things every day. There's no need for your compiler at home or your expensive JetBrains. I love JetBrains for expensive projects. So I hope by sharing that we can be agile by focusing on productivity, learning new languages, learning the language features, focus on simple things. We become much better, and then when we solve problems, we know how to solve them, what problems to prevent, and we make the people who work with us happy. Thank you for your attention. I'll take some questions.